Recorded. Okay, just started recording.
Perfect.
And I don't see Blake yet. It is 8:03, so he is more than a minute late. So let's just get started. And if he's more, I mean, he probably knows how Vert stack works. So let's get into it. So the major kind of things that we need to talk about today are just an introduction to what Vert stack is, and then going into kind of the main principles of what makes Vert stack work, and then some of the handler principles and sort of schematics of how that works, and then the cutting principles and schematics. I'll cover the handler portion, and Daniel will be covering the cutting portion, and we'll kind of each take some stabs at the introduction and the principles. So getting into it. So a vert stack, what you're doing is you're putting these 5 cutters in the middle of the field with 2 handlers back, and that front cutter can also function as a handler. And you're basically separating the field into 2 different sides, which is an open side and a closed side, or some might know it as an open side, break side. So on the open side, that's where the mark is allowing you to throw, and most of the defenders downfield will be on that side. So it's a little harder to get it to the downfield person, as you have to get it to through that defender. On the closed side or the break side, if you can break that mark, you kind of can just run away with it. The downfield defenders aren't there. So once you get past that one person, you're just on a train all the way to the end zone, essentially. So that person at the front of the stack dictates your positioning, and what that kind of means is like, how much laterally are you to the left or right of that thrower? Are you deeper? Are you closer? That stuff is a big responsibility, so it's not to be overlooked at all. And then as you reset, these 3 handlers kind of will work in tandem, and that front person plays a bit of a flexible role, I guess. So they're called a cutter at one point, they're called a handler. It really means that like they can do both things. So there are a couple jobs that can be fulfilled there. So, and as I touched on earlier, we want to get it onto the break side, but also just switching the sides is really rewarding, and that will be kind of what is successful for the vert stack. By breaking that mark and moving that disc laterally, you change the angle of attack frequently, and the defense kind of can't cover everything, essentially. So Diesel, do you want to kind of talk through the advantages and disadvantages of the vert stack?
Yeah. So I guess like with every offense, there's obviously ways to exploit it, and ways you can exploit the defense. So I guess what we see is some of the advantages right away. It's super easy to run. It's kind of very regimented, easy to follow. Timing and spacing comes more naturally once you get in the flow of it. Everybody downfield should know how the offense works. It allows, which I think we have a lot of athletic cutters and cutters that can attack deep space. It allows them to put them in good positions, dominate in their matchups, not only deep, but also under, kind of isolates them. And it also rewards our throwers, our handlers, who I also think are very good at throwing break throws. Puts them at an advantage even more, which helps our offense in general. Some of the disadvantages that are just inherent to the offense are it is easily poached. I'm sure we've all played defense against vert stack, and you can quite easily poach the lanes. If you're a competent defender, you're playing against a bad offense. It is very predictable. You do kind of run the same type of movements. There obviously, as you get more experience, there's a lot more like kind of minutia you can put into it, a lot of tweaks that can mix it up, but in the very basic form, most vert stacks run the exact same way. If you are kind of lazy, picks can be a lot more frequent, slows down the game, not quite as advantageous for the offense. Yeah, you kind of have to make your cuts count, each one. In host stack, there's a lot of options where you can kind of find the open person. If the first cut isn't there, you maybe have 2 or 3 cuts in any stall count before you have to reset it. So you gotta make each cut count basically. And if you're getting greedy, if you have one cutter that wants to get the disc, they can easily clog the lane, kind of stifle the offense, like ruin the whole flow of it. So it's another thing just to be aware of.
Some of the stuff on here, you can, as you start to look at it, you can compare to the host stack offense we ran last year. So one of the points I'd want to touch on is talking about how it puts the athletic cutters in a good position to attack deep. When you're cutting off the back of that vert stack, there's really no help defender. So you are one-on-one with that guy and you can go pretty much wherever on the field you want. Whereas a host stack last year, we saw this all the time where if you're attacking from the middle, going deep, like there's other people who are at your level laterally or even farther behind you. And it just naturally creates that sort of help defense. And we would run into that all the time. Like, especially on demo, there's that one guy who's just like 6'5" or something. And, we would put it up and he's just chilling back there. So the vert stack kind of avoids that. And this bullet point about rewarding throwers with easy throws to open cutters on the break side, that's going to be huge.
Exciting. Now I'm just waiting to see if I'm going to be an aunt or an uncle.
Hey guys, if you're not muted, if you can go ahead and mute yourself during the presentation.
Congrats, Kale, I guess. But yeah, anyway, so the throwing two easy cutters, like basically, you just got to get past that mark and you have, free throws all day. So essentially, like, that's something we want to focus on, is like the better we are with our throws, the more we can take advantage of that. So that is going to be a focal point going forward. So yeah, 4 reasons why vert stack will allow site to succeed. The simpler structure. So even though it is simpler, having that regimented system allows people to learn it a lot faster than the host stack, which kind of requires people to have chemistry with each other and they can just get on the same page quickly. That's kind of bringing us into step 2 or part 2, which, having that plug and play ability with different people is just a lot easier than last year, where we would have a lot of moving parts and people would say like they can go to a tournament but not another tournament. So this just allows everybody to, all know the same system, and it's less so like I know who I'm playing with and, trusting on each other's chemistry. And then another thing that we did really well last year was resetting as handlers. Like, we could reset a lot and we would move it down the field in these very small increments. But a lot of times, like, those handler resets weren't rewarded with more yards on that break side of the field. So the vert stack plays to that advantage because there is a real break side, and there's a real advantage to getting that reset more than just getting a new stall count. And on the last point is, again, those isolated deep cuts, and then more than just having that whole space on the field to attack, it allows you to attack in flow. So in flow means like somebody is making a cut down the field and the offense, is able to time their cut based off of that in cut or whatever sort of cut that's being made, so that the defense has to adjust to that new angle. And because you're in flow now, you can take advantage of them being in a more, I guess, like a weaker state, and that allows you to score more easily. So vert stack principles, I guess, Diesel, do you want to go over this one?
Yeah. So these are just kind of some good principles to live by, I guess, kind of in all offenses, but most importantly, vert. Number one, obviously, we don't want to turn over the disc on offense. That's really all that matters. All our goal and our job on offense is to score. We will do whatever it takes to keep the disc alive. We're going to have rules in our offense about cutting, about handling. Like we're saying, once it gets high stall count, sometimes those rules just go out the window and you do whatever it takes to prevent a stall, prevent a bad look. So there might be unorthodox, you might have to just huck it at the very end, but you want to keep the keep the disc alive at all times. Another thing, just a good principle is always take the open throws. I know sometimes in Frisbee, you almost have like a pecking order of who, as handlers, you want to throw it to or who you're comfortable giving the disc to. In this offense, it's super important to, whenever you get an open look, since there's not going to be quite as many, you always got to give that person the disc, trust them with it, and make sure they give it to them in a good position. We will be talking about how to get the disc back a bit, but it shouldn't be too difficult to get the disc back to the handler. So yeah, like we're saying, throws get harder and harder in the higher stall count. And if no looks are open downfield, we can always swing the disc, and it shouldn't be too difficult to find somebody there either. So.
Okay, I guess I'll take the second principle here. So break throws are king, and that is something we've hit on already multiple times. So, you can tell this is something that is one of the top priorities in a vert stack offense, is being able to hit those throws. Again, by breaking the mark, you are getting to where the defense is weak. So that's something that's kind of shown in this color map here. That's sort of representative of, like where it's red is like, this is the open side. This is where the defense can really shut you down. But if you can get it anywhere in the green area, you have an advantage over that defense. So as long as we can keep playing it in that green area, that's where we'll be successful. In terms of what throws we need to have both our around throws and inside throws, and we have to be, able to be confident in them as a team. So this is going to be something that might just be a focus of the off season. Like if you can go out there and throw rounds, throw insides with the buddy, that'll make you so much more prepared for when the summer comes around. One thing that is important to recognize is that the inside is inherently more risky because you have the mark who's challenging that, and you have the downfield who's challenging that. So if you can break them all the way around, that is, a lot safer of a look, but we have to be able to throw the inside too to challenge that mark, to get them to bite towards that side so that we have that farther around throw. Another principle is, kind of as an offensive player, you have to be able to make value decisions about what you're about to do. So if you see an open cutter on the open side and you have somebody you can hit on the break side, that 10 yards on the break side is way more important than that 10 yards downfield. And that kind of goes back to the gradient. So always like, make those valuations in your head, hit the break side whenever you can. Swinging early and often. So that's something that will be discussed as a principle later. The idea right now is like, if you're on the open side, you're going to get one look. So around stall 2, if it's not there, you got to throw it back to the middle of the field and breaks to the field. Stall 4 is your latest, but again, like as it gets higher in the stall, you're going to have a harder time. So just whenever you can, take that swing. And whenever it is possible, also just having the disc on the break side is going to allow you to score a lot easier.
Yeah, I can talk about this last one. Last principle is timing and spacing are kind of very important, and they're very important to achieving flow in the offense, which is kind of how we ideally want to run most of our offense. Timing of the cuts is something that is super important for the flow. I'm sure we'll be doing a lot of drills on this throughout the season. I know it's always something I would always do. I think it's one of the most important things as a cutter. There's one thing I'll talk about is mirroring the cut, which is basically, I'll talk about it later as well, but setting up your cut. Once one cutter is catching it under, you're setting up your cut to continue that cut and catch the disc 15 yards downfield. So there'll be a visual example of that in a bit. And it is better to start your cut later than it is earlier. It's almost a wasted cut if you are in the spot where you want to catch the disc before the person is ready to throw it. So you're wasting in 1 or 2 stalls. It is better to be a stall late than a stall early. Another really important thing that we need to emphasize is keeping eye contact or eye on the disc when you are cutting. Having your head over your shoulder when you're cutting deep, so you can see when the disc is caught, so you know when to time your undercut or when to make your deep cut. One thing we'll talk about is the kind of point of inflection or the change of direction when you're making your under or deep cut. So when you're catching or when you're cutting deep or under, you'll keep an eye on the disc and kind of that point of inflection or where you want to plant your foot, where you change direction, either under or deep. You want that to be about 15, 20 yards from where the thrower is. So it'll be vary a bit depending on if you're cutting under or deep, but that's basically where you want to kind of plant to catch the disc. See, so kind of a principle in general with Frisbee, but cutting deep, you kind of almost want to angle your cut towards the middle of the field, if not straight vertical. This just creates a lot of space for your thrower. Something that we should work on as well during the regular season. Yeah, like we're saying here, it allows more of the break side when you throw IO. Also, you lose less space when you're coming under. So let's see, last point, once we are kind of no longer in the flow state, so you catch the disc, the first look isn't there, second look isn't there, that's when we want to swing the disc. So if you're on the force side, you want to try and get it over to the break side. If you're on the break side, you can get it to the middle of the field, and it'll just open up different lanes that the defense isn't ready for, and get us hopefully back into the flow state.
So Dave, before you take the next slide, any questions so far or any comments on what we've reviewed so far?
I'll also mention that some of that stuff we talked about, especially with like how the cut timing is going to work and making those cuts vertical, if not to the break side slightly, that will be shown in the film. And I have an example of where someone didn't do that correctly and the defender wasn't taken out of the play, and you'll see why that's something we want to do. But if we don't have any questions, I'm going to move on. So handler resets. I'll preface this by saying also, even if you are a cutter, this stuff is still really important for you to know, especially if you're going to be playing in the end zone. But at some point, as a cutter, you may be forced to be a handler for like, one throw or something. And this is something that you still want to keep in mind. So
And I'll step in and say it's almost more, I find it you're a handler more as a cutter in the vert stack than you are a host stack. And your role in that is more important than being in a host stack. You can kind of hide as a handler in a host stack if you're a cutter by position, but in a vert stack, you're almost necessarily going to be in the rotation.
Yeah, thanks, Diesel. That's really good. A lot of times in that host stack, like a cutter will catch it and just bump it, and you don't really have to ever think about a lot of this stuff. So in a vert stack, you might be forced to do more of this sort of handler movement. So getting into it, the general rules that we have. So we don't force tight throws unnecessarily. If we're going to have a turnover, it's best to have that turnover downfield rather than the backfield where, there's really no defense to help you and they're that much closer to scoring. So being able to gauge when you have an open throw and you don't, and when you need to put it into a tighter window, there are going to be games where, the defense is just that good. And sometimes you have to be throwing into places where you're not comfortable, but that's going to be something that we're going to have to get good at gauging. And I understand this is somewhat of a murky point, but yeah, that's something that's pretty critical as a handler. Recognizing the style of defense that's being applied, and then kind of what that means for where you want to attack. So if somebody is really scared of your strike cut, for example, if you know you've burned them a couple times and they're just shading you a couple more yards now, you have a free round, right? So the thrower needs to recognize that, and you need to recognize that, and just be on the same page. And they're going to be able to just hit you for that easy round without you even having to make a fake cut, for example. So, you know, there's going to be lots of times where that's going to be applied, and that's a really good general rule. Working as a team, so the handler reset space, you have to clear hard. You have a lot of space to work with, but if you're not open, you got to clear hard for your reset, and that's not something that really is very complicated, and that pretty much goes for most frisbee in general. And then the last point is being vocal and communicating. So, you know, as you're getting set up, like letting your handler know, like, hey, I'm in. You know, you're setting the stack or something, like as it's flowing, it's really important when we're in that flow space, like we still have to be telling each other what we want to, what we plan to do. If, you know, if you don't think you're open, let them know, like, hey, I'm clearing. And nonverbal cues are also important. So as a handler, if you're the person with the disc and you're trying to communicate to your downfield, you know, using fakes is a really good way to keep the downfield on the same page with you, so that there's not like you throw it deep and they just came under sort of situation. So getting into the actual specifics of what it looks like. When you're resetting on the open side sideline, this is what it looks like. So essentially you have one person who starts at this 45 degrees. One thing that we've discussed is why you want to set up at this angle. You know, in our sort of offensive group, and the reasons are basically to allow for that easier reset. So when you're sitting up high, this
Hey,
throw,
David.
Yeah.
Will you show what side's upfield?
Yeah, let me draw on this thing. Oh man, that's terrible. I'm so sorry.
You also might need to let in Ty Rob to the chat, sorry.
All good. Okay, so we're going this way. Forces to the brakes, the backhand side. I apologize that is also not really what people are necessarily comfortable with, but we're going upfield. This is that 45 degree angle sort of space. So, you know, this is the angle. That looks terrible.
Recording in progress.
So, yeah, basically, you know, if you're gonna hit this around, you can hit it here and not lose a ton of yardage. Whereas if they start to cut down here and you have to hit them on the around, you're losing 10 yards and you're kind of losing that kind of angle to attack the next area of the field. And then if you're not able to get that around, you're clearing up line, trying to get that strike, and then this person's just going and cycling with you. As you're getting to that top of that strike, if you're not open, a thing you can do is just plant and come back around, as you're seeing right now. So that gives you one extra look kind of per cut that you're going to make. So, you know, that allows you to also challenge them if they're guarding really aggressively on that strike. If you're able to hit the strike, it also sets the thrower up in a power position. So downfield, you want to be cognizant of that and timing your cut, you know, based off of if they're about to get it up the line.
And
So,
again, this is forced backhand, correct?
This is forced backhand. I'm so sorry that it's, I tend to do backhand all the time. And
yeah, I'm just making sure everyone knows.
Yep. So, you know, this one here, the white is the defense, and just being cognizant of that. And that is something you'll see, you know, all the time in a real game, right? People switch the force on you, and we have to be aware of when that happens. So the around cut, like I mentioned earlier, if they're sitting on your strike, like you can just get that for free. Otherwise, if you push them up into that strike with a fake, you can get that. The clearing is a bit complicated here if you go for that around and it's not open. So basically what's happening is this. And like say you didn't get it open right here. So I'm gonna put a big X there. What you want to do is actually go straight back here. And that takes you out of the play, and more importantly, it takes the defender out of the play, so that if they choose to go poach the next thing that's coming, you can hit them, and then they have a free around throw as well, or you're just out of the play and the next guy can make his move. And by the time, you know, if that guy isn't open, then you're probably looking at a stall 8 situation. And then you just, you got to do what you got to do at that point.
David, can you talk about the spacing there? Like how many yards are we looking at?
Yeah, so right about here, I would say is like a maximum of 50. Oh, that's 15 yards between like the maximum farthest space you want to hit a strike cut on. If you're making your strike cut like way up here, and let's say this is like 20 yards, 25 yards, people from the stack are kind of sitting, like you can see where this guy is like setting the stack. They can go poach that, and you're putting your strike handler into a bad situation where they could potentially get bodied out, and at you might get blocked too, and those are both really bad situations. Thanks for the question, Chaz. Is there are there any other questions?
Just the same thing on the around cut. Where's the spacing on that?
On the around cut, you're kind of setting up in the same way. So by the time you're about 10-15 yards upfield, you probably know you're not going to get it. So the spacing laterally is probably around 15-20 yards. Like you're trying to get it as far off that line as possible. 20 yards puts you at half field. So that's kind of, yeah, I guess that's like ideal. And then going back is also about 15 yards.
Good.
So
Yeah.
does that make sense?
David, I think that really speaks to what you were talking about earlier about us needing to have that around throw, whether it's our around flick or our around backhand to break the mark. That's definitely going to be something that we want to be throwing to space on, because when you're talking about the amount of yards you're asking that person to cover for that reset, we're hoping to be able to put that disc out into the space where they're going to catch it at that 15-yard mark, right? Not that we're waiting for them to get there and then we're able to finally hit them. So just some things to definitely go along with some individual goals that people have. You definitely put in that work as soon as you can start throwing.
Yep, absolutely. So these around throws, they're intended to be throwing to a space and not to a person. That's another kind of great principle to keep in mind. So thank you, Balls.
I had a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
If it's too in the weeds, don't worry about it. But I guess if, say you do the strike cut off the 45 and your guy just sits in the lane, is it best to clear out and hope that your guy can break the mark, like with a big, in this case, a big around flick? So, or clear back after you vacate the strike space to try to get an around that way, if that makes sense.
I would like some clarification, on that.
So I guess if your guy just sits in the space after you do the strike cut.
Yeah, so you're making a strike cut and your defender doesn't follow you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say, go for the big swing at that point, right? Because that's just free. And at that point, you're so far upfield that inside is an available option. And if, even if you can't hit the inside, the mark has to react to it, and that allows you for the free throw around. So, definitely take the round, and it's pretty easy to get. And that kind of goes back to like the only thing that could bottleneck that is whether or not you have the throwing prowess to do it. So go throw. That's right. Like that's the important thing there.
That makes sense though. That makes sense.
Yeah, good question.
Hey, I got one. Just to clarify, 100% on the same page. We're saying that the front of the stack is 18 yards or so from that line of scrimmage.
Yeah, laterally they're just set up roughly in the middle of the field.
Well, I know the left, right there in the middle of the field, barring no crazy wind. What about like the distance from like the line of scrimmage where the disc is at?
Sorry, Billy, do you mean like vertically?
Yeah.
Yeah, like 5-10 yards is kind of a guideline for vertical spacing. And then like laterally, maybe like 15 yards.
I'm just saying, like, where is the front of the stack setting the stack, like distance?
Billy, you're a little muffled. I'm sorry.
Billy, he's saying that we're going to be about 10 yards up and about midfield. for the front of the stack.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Chaz. Okay, yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff that, you know, we're gonna have to learn here as we go into the season, and it'll come with practice. And then another thing is, like, I've tossed a lot of these numbers out at you, but at the end of the day, I think what's gonna happen is, like, you have to understand what works for you and kind of what your defender's doing, and it's gonna be very you know, it's just gonna be something you have to decide on in the moment, and you'll kind of have to figure it out intuitively, I guess. But those numbers are a good starting point. With that, we'll move on to kind of the middle of the field. I'd like to get rid of all these. Okay, so the rage cut, the way that works is, you know, we're still going upfield this way, bottom to top. So you're at about stall 4 or something, and you need a reset. So what's going to happen is this thrower who is on the open side of you and back to about a 45 degrees is going to make some sort of move to try to get it as a dish laterally across the field. So like this way. And then the reason that's really advantageous for us is it's a really simple throw, and you attack the break space by doing so. And then, you know, a lot of times you'll be able to get some sort of continuation cut from up here, if not from the front of the stack also. The L cut is kind of the counter to the rage cut. So the rage cut is obviously a very simple move. So a lot of defenders will know how to cover that. If they start being aggressive and covering the space kind of to where the break side is, or they're set up on you in such a way that that's not possible, you fake that, and then you just make this L shape kind of up the field this way, and this throw is a bit of like an inside, and that sets you up in a power position onto the open side. I mentioned those two cuts, but really it's, you know, once you're in the middle of the field, you have so much stuff that you can do. And as you get more familiar with the people on your lines, you'll develop kind of chemistry, and you'll know what the other person's looking for. And as long as you're on the same page, you know, you do whatever you got to do to get that reset. And then finally on the break side, you have the option of running strike, which is identical to the open side. And, you know, this is a very powerful thing that you can do, because if you do get that strike cut, which you can kind of throw an inside to or an around to, it's almost a guaranteed score, just because break side hucks are so difficult to guard. Running the around, so to speak, is kind of just running that strike onto the break space this way and going back around. And that's also identical to the open side. And then this final move that you kind of see a lot at high level, and I've had it called the UNC move. There might be other names for it, but essentially what's happening is the disc is on the break side, and the middle of the field gets the reset directly behind him. And the person who originally had the disc just slashes across the middle, and that disc goes back to them in a sort of give-go move. And then that gets the disc moving laterally across the field again in a very quick way. And that, you know, is one of the ways that the Vert stack works, is by quickly changing the field. So on the break side, kind of the general principle we have to recognize is, like, however that defender is set up on you is going to dictate a lot of how you're going to attack the spacing. So if they're, you know, giving you that sort of hardest look, right, push them back a little bit and then try to get that inside. And that's something that as you gain experience, you will just know intuitively how to attack. Does anyone have any more questions on handler resets? Awesome. Okay, I'm going to pass this off to Diesel.
Nice. Yeah, I'll be talking about kind of the cutting basics in Vert stack, along with kind of the basic movements. So kind of maybe not so different from host stack, but the cuts are set up more vertically, and they're also going to be carried through more vertically, going up and down the field as Opposed to in hoe stack, there's a lot of slashing cuts, more diagonal across the field and under space. The kind of rule of thumb that we're going to run by is cuts are always going to come from the back of the stack, no matter what. So you can see in some of these pictures, we have them numbered, but it's always going to come from the back. And once your cut is done, you're always going to clear to the front of the stack. And by the front of the stack, I mean behind the stack setter, which is going to be our like third handler, basically. So you're going to go to the second spot in the stack after your cut is done. So those are going to be two super important rules that we're most likely going to run by the entirety of the year, unless we're running kind of set play that we set ahead of time. So I've always been like a visual learner, and I always think of cuts are essentially triangles when you're making them on the field. You have to kind of set up your cut, like either get into the lane, either going deep or under. This will help avoid picks, and you can kind of make a read on your defender as well to see which way you want to cut. But simply, they're triangle shaped. I'll kind of go through the unders right now. You can see in this section, the person in the back of the stack is going deep, maybe 3 to 5, 7 yards, getting a read on their defender. They're making a hard cut and they're cutting straight under to an open look. The first one here, the 7, is cutting to the 4 side for an easy 4 side throw if they beat their defender. The cutter number 6, he's setting up deep, cutting under break side, which is usually very open, but more difficult throw for the handler. But once they're done their cut, if they don't get it, they're clearing straight back to the front of the stack, and the stack is rotating up, allowing the next person to make the cut. When we're going to the deep, it's also somewhat set up like a triangle. The cutter is initiating their cut. They're going out into the lane a bit, again, to kind of avoid picks. They're either going, there's kind of 2 ways you can set it up. You can either go under for a couple steps, kind of get a read on the defender. If they're just giving you the under, you can take it. If not, you can plant hard, go deep. It's kind of hard. It doesn't show it too well in this animation, but you want to kind of move your cut towards the middle of the field. This will give the thrower a lot of space to throw. And if you don't get the cut, you are sprinting hard under, because there is another look. If you don't get this deep, you can see this number 5 here is coming hard under. There's another look, and if they don't get it, they're clearing to the front of the stack. And then this last animation is a continue cut, is what I call it, or the mirror cut is what you might hear it as. Kind of what our typical flow would look like if we're running all through the 4 side. The number 7 is setting up deep, cutting under, catching the disc in the 4 side. Right as that first person is making their cut under, the next person in the stack is setting up their next cut. The timing isn't great here in this kind of GIF here, but right when the number 7 is catching the disc, the number 6 is planting their foot and making the cut under. And this will be we'll probably run a lot of drills simulating this. This will be very much in the flow. And once that number 6 has the disc, the next person in the stack can do the exact same thing. It's a very easy way to gain, 15, 20, 30 yards in just 2-3 throws. So that's essentially what the basic movement of the vert stack is. Kind of the last point here is we only want 1 cutter in each lane at the same time. So the mirror cut is kind of an example, I guess. We're only having 1 cutter in the 4 side. If he doesn't get it, he clears out and makes room for the next cutter to be ready. That's just a very efficient way. But a lot of times what I've seen in the past is we run almost zipper play, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen before or heard of, where you have 1 person cut to the force side, one person cut to the break side, one person cut deep. That gives the handlers basically a look in all three of the lanes that we use, the break side, force side, and deep, and lets them make a decision on what is the most open from there. And if none of the cuts are open, they all clear back to the stack and continue on with the flow. So only one person in each lane at a time for the cuts. So any questions right away with kind of the basics of this vert stack?
What's the timing, like a dead disc?
The timing of the dead disc, typically you would want the cut to start before the disc is in play. So you have basically your first look, either the person is going under or deep when the disc is tapped in. So they can, in theory, throw their first completion in like the first 1 or 2 stalls, as opposed to when you tap the disc in and then the cut starts, it might take 2, 3, 4 stalls before the first look is. So it's a good thing to work as a team, is to get cuts moving before the disc is tapped in, so we can kind of get in the flow state as quick as possible. So just kind of some cutting rules as well. I think I probably touched on some of this stuff, but clearing out of the lanes is very, very important. Because we only have kind of 2 active lanes and where you're cutting from is in the middle of them, clearing out is very, very important. You'll see a lot of bad teams or young teams or new players, they'll make their cut under, they see they don't get the disc, and they'll just kind of jog, turn their head away from the disc and just jog into the stack. I'm sure as a lot of you have played defense before, that's ripe for poaching. Right when you're the person you're guarding kind of turns their head away and just jogs away. As you can kind of see in this GIF here, it's very ripe for poaching and just standing in that force side lane, easily stifling the offense and basically taking away a good look for us on offense. So clearing is super hard, hard cut and hard sprint to the stack, super important, keeps the defense honest. And the thing to note is you will be standing in the stack if you're a cutter for, could be 4 to 6, could be 10 seconds, depending how the offense is going. So it's worth cutting hard. You will get, a little bit of break before you have to run again. So another thing I didn't touch on is it is pretty normal to be standing in the stack and not moving at all. It's something you kind of have to get comfortable with. You're in the middle of the field, but you are just standing still. That's what makes the offense flow. Sometimes it's better if you don't know what you're doing, just to stand still in the stack. Somebody will tell you what to do or make the cut for you, and it's better than trying to just cut out of the middle of the stack and clogging up the offense. Yeah, like we've been talking about, the basic rules of vert, cutting hard and clearing hard, are really important for the flow. Even if you're not getting the disc, super important to make your cuts hard. It can get discouraging, but it really keeps the defense honest and tires them out, and really leads to success. Yeah, like I said, lazy cuts leads to poaching, which we really don't want. It's something that you can easily exploit with vert stack, especially with experienced defense. So something you want to be aware of. So any other questions before we move on?
Hey, Diesel, I've got a quick comment here too. Like you talked about getting that rest while you're in the stack. That can be a really good tactical thing too. As you're going into a tournament that you know that those cutters might be working pretty hard, not having to have them run all the time can save a lot of legs. So like last season, in the horizontal stack, a lot of times people were making their cuts like 24/7, right? Like yeah, Dan going deep, coming under and going deep like 2 more times in just 1 point, and that just kills people's legs. And this is sort of a more efficient way to make your cuts, and it also lets the handlers read it a little easier, knowing that you have basically 2 spaces where a cut could happen, and it's just a matter of the cutter beating the defender. Sorry, I was on mute the whole time, so I don't know if anyone heard that.
I heard you, yeah. At
Okay,
least I did.
awesome.
Yeah, we heard you.
Okay, for some reason I had to unmute there, so. All right, going into our film analysis. So let's just dive into this. Is everybody able to see this right now?
Yep, I can see it.
Awesome.
Do you want us to hear the video sound?
No, I mean, I think you should be able to just look at what's going on. The announcers are just kind of hyping up the play, I guess. So kind of what you're seeing is like, that initial kind of movement up the brake side and them switching it over as they're not able to keep it moving up that brake side. So you saw them like realize that flow state isn't continuing, and they switched the field over and started attacking up the open side. So good effective use of both lanes simultaneously. If you watch the start of that point, you'll see that they attack both the open and brake side lanes, which is something that I think Diesel talked about, and then using that inside throw to keep the disc on the brake side. And here, so the example of the UNC move. So you can kind of see how effective that was. Like he went basically across the field like 35 yards, and now he's moving it upfield pretty quickly. If anyone has any comments, I also really would love if you have them, go ahead and say them. These links will be available later, so if you want to go back and watch them through, that's something else you can do.
Yeah, if you are familiar with the progression, when we used to run the full progression, that is pretty much the give go move that we had when you would swing from the brake side to the middle. So definitely some of you that should have that kind of in the back of your brain still, hopefully.
Okay, so you're about to see this guy's gonna shoot it deep, but you can see that he's making his cut kind of towards the back cone, I guess, the back open side cone. And because of that, the thrower isn't able to get it to him as easily. Whereas if he just tails off to the middle or breaks out of the field, this is a great opportunity for him to just, run under it. You can see this again. Like there's really no reason for this guy to kind of take himself out of the space, right? Like if you attack middle of the field, the thrower has more space to throw it to you. So here we're just going to see how the break space can be, utilized to gain a lot of yardage. So, again, those are just examples of as a mark, you're the only person kind of stopping anything going to that side. So if the thrower can just get it around, it's just free yards.
And do you just want to do the second link for this one?
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll kind of set up this play. So I think this is just like a great angle for viewing Frisbee. So this is like the very start of the game. You can see they're going to center the disc. There's, I think, going to be a four side look and a break side look. They're forcing backhand. They're going to make a break throw. And the person at the now back of the stack is going to make a deep cut, and this thrower is going to be able to make a throw and get an easy open deep throw for a score. So I think that's just a great initiating play for an offense. Gives a good view of kind of what we want to see for the action. 2 kind of open looks to start, fore side and break side. And that break side throw, which our throwers can make, leads to a very open, deep cut and a deep throw for a score. So you can see kind of a difficult throw there, I think, a scuba, but that leads to a very open cutter. You can, then that person at the back of the stack is isolated, no help defense, can make an easy deep cut for an easy goal.
While we're here too, let's quickly talk about sort of this timing, right? So as he's catching it, like I paused it right here where he's just starting to look upfield. So he's not quite ready to be throwing it, but as he's kind of getting planted and set up, Joe White is pushing out into the lane. So in a vert stack, we talked about how it's possible to cause picks. So you want to be pushing your cuts out into the lane before you start. That allows you to also kind of engage your defender more closely, get close to them, make them uncomfortable. And then, so right at this point, the thrower is now fully squared up, looking downfield, and that's exactly when Joe takes off. So that's really good timing. And you can see he's, kind of angling his cut vertically, still keeping that space, and allows him sort of to react to that throw that's coming in pretty platey.
Yes. And just kind of as a side note, on this guy has a bunch of videos from a great angle for like viewing perspective of nationals this year. Unfortunately, the only team that consistently runs vert is Sub-Zero, and they don't really run a standard vert. But it is probably good to watch. They do a lot of kind of funky stuff in their vert, like cutting from the front or middle of the stack, which you kind of need a lot of chemistry for, but probably great for watching for defense, host stack, anything like that. Probably 10 games in there. So
Nick, you had a question?
Yeah. So I'm seeing a lot of like give and goes, which I love, especially like with the UNC move is what you guys are calling it. I really like that a lot. But I guess I know Diesel was talking earlier about like the mirror cutting downfield. We call that like waterfall cutting when I was playing corn fed. Is the goal when you get the disc, and this might be like just when you get the disc, you figure it out, but is the goal to dish it back to handle? Or my intuition, what you guys were talking earlier, was to try to like look up line and try to get those like mirror cuts and stuff like that. Again, maybe it's just like you figure it out when you're on the field, but I was just curious.
I think it is kind of read the play. I think if you have an option to get your handler in a power position, do that. If you're getting maybe a 20-yard under, I would say turn and look upfield for a continue cut for maybe 1 or 2 looks, like 4 stalls if you're a cutter, and then turn to a handler and try and reset it. I think us as a team are competent enough throwers to be able to have our cutters make downfield throws and be comfortable enough to make resets when we need. So, but it is kind of a read. I think it is super important if you are catching kind of a short under, maybe look to the handler right away for a give and go, get them in power position or something. But otherwise, I think it's quite fine to look upfield if you're a cutter and catch it.
I think it also goes to the point where we spoke of earlier. You kind of take what's given. We talked about like hitting open players and not forcing things. Like if the other handler that's working with you feels as though they're given an upline and they take that, you should probably go with that. So it definitely is a read the scenario thing. And that kind of goes along the lines of take what's giving to you to get yourself into power positions.
I also kind of think of it like you have a default state, and then like there are those exceptions like what was just talked about. So my default is like if I'm cutting and I catch it, I'm going to immediately look upfield, and there might be a huck there or someone coming under, and those would be the 2 things I would hit right away. If I don't see those, I would probably turn and try to hit a handler. But as long as you're able to maintain that flow state, which I think was a second sort of the two options. Like if you're able to maintain that, I think that's kind of the default. Keep on flowing as long as it's open. And then once we start to not be able to just keep popping off those open side throws, then that's when you got to recognize that, pause, and then we switch the field.
Yeah, and on some cutters especially put a lot on their individual goals that they want to learn how to throw deep better. This offense should really help generate those type of looks because it is just going to be an isolated cut for you. So when you look upfield after catching your under, you should be able to look upfield and you have that isolated cut, and it's either going to be another under or a deep. And if the timing is good, if the spacing is good, if you've got the throw, then we're going to want you to be able to utilize that throw. If not, then obviously, you look for your resets, you work the offense. But I think as far as matching up with what a lot of you put as your individual goal, especially if you're a cutter, I think that's going to be really fun for a lot of people to get to work on that without the kind of stuff that gets in the way from a host stack perspective, where there are just a lot of more considerations to have. So I'm looking forward to seeing how people grow with that.
Okay, so I guess what I'm hearing is that basically it's at the end of the day it's a read, but we are going to see a lot more throws upfield, like continuation cuts rather than dumps. It sounds like, which I agree. I think it's a good idea, especially with the goals, like you said, Bals. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the way I heard you guys.
Yes, I think so. And I think ideally our throws are going to be a lot further downfield, 10 plus yards. And the bump right away is going to take a few seconds to get there. So I think a upfield look is going to be the ideal look.
I think also just, really understanding the base level of like, what is a cutter? What is a handler, right? Like a cutter, your job is to keep that disc moving vertically and gaining that sort of up down yardage. So while you're making your cuts, like if you can hit that next throw downfield, that's part of your job still. The handler's job is more defined as like you're changing the angle of attack, you're getting resets, and you're moving the disc laterally across the field. And obviously that's kind of probably an oversimplification of what it means to be a cutter and a handler, but that's probably the best explanation for what the two roles are in this sort of offense.
I have a question that I might have been walking in the door during about cutters clearing. Where exactly are they clearing? Is it to the middle of the stack?
It'll be to the front of the stack is what we call it, but it'll be right behind the person who sets the stack, like the third handler. So you can kind of see in these GIFs, but it is a good clarification. So the stack will kind of shift up as we do it, but always to what we'll call like the front of the stack.
So they're not going to be setting the stack on their clear.
No, because the person setting the stack is almost just looking straight down at the handlers, gauging depth, and they're kind of locked in to that role. So
cool.
The cutters the four kind of cutters will mostly be cutting, and then the three handlers will mostly be handling.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so I have a ton of these clips from this 2018 game where Sub-Zero beat Revolver on Universe. It's a super awesome game, just for watching, I guess. And this game really showcases like what kind of a pure vert stack looks like. I think they got a little bit away from this sort of vert stack over the last couple of years, but this is like kind of exactly how we sort of should be running it. There's a couple things that happened that shouldn't have happened in here and I have highlighted them, I think, where somebody like got greedy or something and cut early and cut somebody off or something like that. So, since it has been like an hour, I don't know if we necessarily want to go through every one of these, but maybe a couple of these just to kind of see what it looks like. So sorry. And this first one, they're going to run a flood play out of the vert, but they kind of regroup into a vert. So you're going to see some timing from their cutters, and at some point you're going to see that the flow state stops and they have to do that unorthodox sort of cut. And that's something that we've talked about. So
Yeah, as this is playing, if you need to drop because of time, don't worry about it. We are recording, so you can always pick up where we leave off. But lots of good stuff so far, so.
So you can see that they're starting off pretty much on the break side there, in terms of like where they set their stack. And that's not something that would be done normally, but just because of the way they're running that set play. So that cut timing as they're going down the open side is, flowing very nicely, even though, and right there, they're out of the flow state, right? Because their first look wasn't open. And then we'll just kind of highlight right here. So they catch it on the sideline here. First look's not open. And he starts looking at his reset. Now his reset's not going to get open because number 4 here is being a little bit lazy and not clearing out properly. So that's something you definitely want to avoid. But he realizes he's trapped, and 8 here, I think, just realizes what's going on. Doesn't waste a second, just quickly makes a move and resets it for him. And that allows the offense just to keep trucking. So good swing there. And this is sort of like a little taste for what the offense in the end zone might look like for the year as well. This is just kind of an idea of what like a good spacing for a deep shot would look like, and great spacing and timing. So we'll just kind of take a look at like right here again, like before, as he's catching it, maybe a little early here, but he sets up to start going as the thrower is turning around, so that when the thrower turns, he's got that deep look immediately, and he's not wasting time, and he just makes that quick kind of fake inside and takes his cut, gets a score.
What I really like about that clip, Dave, is that because that end cut is being caught at basically in the middle of the stack as far as depth, you have to push deep as a cutter to set up your next cut no matter what, so that you have enough space to actually be making even an undercut. And so it really puts your defender in a terrible position. They have to honor something. And that's a really good look of what our continuation cuts should create. Again, a really good opportunity for not just the person that's cutting, but the person who wants to work on that deep shot from the cutting space.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, another area where our athletes can just, absolutely take advantage of their defenders, and they're not being held back by the system that's, putting a lot of help defenders in their way.
One thing that I learned from like my experience in like deep cutting out of a vert is like you're late if on that clap from that thrower, like when that thrower claps to actually catch it, you're late if you're not already setting up your cut. So like that's something that helped me with timing a lot, was focusing on, I should be looking at the whole play so that I know when something's going to happen so that I can time it off that. Because on that clap, that thrower is looking up immediately. And if you're not already in that cut, you're too late. It's not going to be open.
Yep, absolutely. I'm not going to watch this one again. We just talked about cutting, timing, and spacing. Yeah, I think break side throws we got a pretty good handle on. Let's go in here. Okay, this clip here kind of showcases like when the disc is rapidly moving from side to side, how effective that can be. So we're starting off on the open side, and within those 2 throws, right, you've already moved it onto the break space. And they're, Ryan Osgaard's trying to preserve that break side spacing and positioning, so he's passed it on the inside there. That was a rage cut you just saw. So as he's coming around, now he gets that break side look, and just keeps it moving. We'll just skip through this foul call. So there, I think you saw the disc probably swing like 5 or 6 times, and that just is such a hard thing to guard when you're constantly having to readjust your positioning. Yeah, this is kind of like a moment when something doesn't quite go right. So Sub-Zero is gonna start off of a dead disc here, and what you're gonna see is that as they swing this disc onto the break side, there's gonna be a cutter who's coming from the downfield spot who's more available to attack this, but the person in the back of the stack doesn't check over his shoulder and gets kind of greedy and takes that cut away from him. So he's going deep there, disc swings, and that guy was in kind of position to do it, but because of that, the top of the stack just took the cut away, so they cleared back. So another general principle of cutting is just always like check over whatever shoulder you're about to cut on and make sure that there's no one in that space. And this one, just a little handler motion. So you'll see this kind of spacing on the strike positioning. So he's setting up at that 45-degree angle. Initially, you also saw this reset handler sitting back here and getting in the way of that cut, and he's very cognizant of what that means, so he quickly gets out of the way, and that's awesome. So as they reset, now they only have lost 5 yards, say, instead of like losing 10 or 15 yards. And because of that, he's able to effectively connect to the next person. And then this here is the UNC move, but they don't throw it. So yeah, that's all I've got. Thanks everybody for coming. Really appreciate it. Diesel, thanks for helping put this together with me.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to say, just kind of in general, a lot of what we've talked about, it's we don't expect you to, get on the field and be able to, run Vert perfectly. We're just kind of laying down the framework so you have in your mind how we are going to be running Vert this upcoming year. Obviously going to be taking a lot of practice, a lot of commitment from all y'all to learn the offense and get the hang of it. So glad we could kind of give you our idea of what this Vert stack is, and hopefully turns out to be pretty successful.
Yeah, any questions from folks as far as what we've gone over or anything that they're still wondering about for the offense?
Fuck yeah.
Well, that
Thanks,
was
Sarah.
that was a lot of fun to kind of go through that with everybody. I really appreciate everybody's level of participation, all the great questions and everything.
Yeah, big thanks to David and to Daniel for putting this together. Thanks everyone for coming out. We had 19 people on the call. I know there are some other people who are going to be catching up on the recording, so we'll get that up onto the YouTube as soon as possible if you want to go over this or if you missed part of it. That should be helpful with that. And then we can also make sure that the deck itself is shared within our group and on the sheet so that folks can jump into all these awesome video links that they cut up for us. So again, just really big thanks to David and Daniel for starting us off, and looking forward to continuing doing this until May.
Yeah.
It sounds good. Have a great night, everybody.